down on poachers, it is considering legal trade. So the question we're asking tonight is, can the free market save the rhino? A prominent economist says it's the only way. In his recent book, Dawie Roodt argues that the high price for rhino horn will encourage farmers to breed and protect rhino if they are allowed to reap the profits. And by meeting demand, prices will come down. On the other side of the fence, well, we'll see. We have Nigel Morgan, the chair of Focus Africa Foundation. The non-profit was involved in operating an intelligence team on the ground in the Kruger Park. It's currently involved in the Joachim Chissano Mozambique Wildlife Initiative. Good evening to you both, gentlemen. Dawie, let's start with you. So lay it out in simple terms why free trade, letting everybody make money off the rhinos, will help them.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I have to criticize you. The reason why I have to criticize you is because look around here. Look at this picture over here, for example. There's a rhino with the horn cut off. Look at the insert, for example. There were people pleading for the survival of the rhino. And there were ugly, terrible pictures of the rhinos without horns. And that is not the way to approach this problem.
You're saying we're being emotive?
We are being emotional. We are looking at rhinos and we see they're cuddly things. We need to look after them. And people are trying to support their arguments by producing pictures like these. And that is not the way to do this. The way that we have to address all problems in life is to be rational about things. Now let me give you the rational answer to this. And let me give you the rational facts. If I want to buy a rhino, and I can buy a rhino legally, provided I've got the farm and provided I get all the licenses and the permits and things. If I want to buy a rhino, I can buy a rhino for 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 rand, for example. If I buy that rhino and I cut off its horn and I smuggle it out to Vietnam and I go and sell that horn powder on the streets in Vietnam, I can get close to 20 million rand, around about 16, 17 million rand.
For one
rhino. This is the reality. Is that the supply and the demand and the gap between those prices are so wide that the market forces, and whether you like this and whether you're emotional about this or not, but the market forces will try to close that gap. Now either the top price will come down or the bottom price will go up. And it doesn't matter what we do, we are not going to stop the reality of market forces. So let's accept that. Now that's my proposal. Let's work with the market instead of fighting the market.
Nigel, what's your opinion?
Well, with Dawie, I agree. This is not going to be won through emotional arguments. The data is frightening. We've seen a huge increase in rhino killings, which really started about 2010, and it just went 12% in 2011, 18% increase 2012, 27 in 2013, and 33% last year. And we have reached crisis point. If you look at the data, particularly, 68% of these rhinos have been poached in the Kruger National Park. That is the epicenter of what we call the rhino war. And they're losing the battle. And I think that rather than, as it's becoming very emotional about it, we need to look for answers. And 50% of the way to finding the right answer is asking the right questions. So I don't disagree with Dawie.
Is the free market the way?
I think that the free market definitely has a role, but not now. And not now because we need to address the critical problem that we have. And that critical problem is that the international syndicates who are involved in this crime are winning. And if we go over to an open market or regulated market in rhino horn, I think what we're going to find is a parallel market. In other words, you're going to have legal and illegal. And I'll take you back to the ivory example. You know, we've tried selling ivory before in an attempt to reduce international price in ivory, and it didn't work.
Well, Dawie, let's get to this point, because looking at that ivory, and I think Born Free has also raised this, they sent out tons into the market to deal with the demand, and what it did was stimulate demand. Elephant poaching spiked after that. Isn't this, and classical economists would say sometimes supply doesn't deal with demand, sometimes supply creates demand.
Yeah, maybe let me just
Like
correct
for
one or
drugs,
two things. Yeah, let me just correct one or two things. I don't like to use the word poaching, because there's, again, an emotional thing about poaching. It sounds illegal. But the problem that I have is that it's not poaching that we're dealing with. We are dealing with theft. It's theft, like anything else. And if you talk about theft, then the question that you need to address is private ownership. So that's what it, or ownership at least. And look at, and you are mentioning ivory, and I think ivory is a special case. Ivory is a special case for various reasons, and I'm trying to duck the question. But ivory is a special case because elephants are huge things. You need a massive farm. Very few people can actually breed with elephants. I think that's part of the reason, or part of the answer for that.
No, but the point is that selling the ivory didn't deal with the demand.
How do you know that?
And why will it be different with rhino horn?
We don't know that, and we don't know about rhino. There's no difference between rhino. There's no difference between the dynamics behind rhino horn and the dynamics behind diamonds, for example. It's exactly the same. If there's a fall, if there's a proper advertisement, if it's a girl's best friend, for example, you will see an increase in the demand for diamonds, for example. They've been wonderfully successful, De Beers, in doing that, as an example. What we need to do, we need to start breeding rhinos, and we must send out advertisements that our rhino in South Africa has got special qualities. Buy our rhino. And I promise you that there will be more rhino. Today we have more wildlife in South Africa than what we've had since probably 200 years ago. Two things changed. The one is that the private ownership moved from the state to the private individual, firstly, and secondly, we started to utilize game. We started hunting game. We started killing rhinos, and we started killing buffalo, and today there are more. Don't fight the market, work with the market. But what is very important, I am not in favor of theft. I want ownership to settle with the private individual, preferably, and the ownership also means that private individuals should get the benefits from trading out of his property, like selling cattle, selling lamb, or whatever the case.
Nigel, should we start advertising our rhino?
Certainly not. Poaching, theft, they're both a crime. And what we're seeing in South Africa is in our national parks, and particularly the Kruger National Park, which is an icon of world conservation that goes back over 120 years, is a decline in the rhino population there. And is dropping. I mean, if you get a population growth rate of 6.1%, a natural death rate of 1.9%, it should mean a growth rate of 4.2%. Last year it dropped by 4.8% minus. So we're losing the war in the Kruger National Park. And why are we selling rhino horn? What on earth is the ultimate value of this product? It's got no medicinal value. It's about as useful as chewing your toenails.
So you're saying deal with the education and tell people there's no need for it in the first place.
You're touching something completely wrong, because that's not the reason.
You're saying it's a false commodity.
The problem that what you are pointing out quite correctly is that we've got some administrative issues here. We've got some managerial issues here.
Yes.
We've got some efficiency issues here. Nothing to do with rhino horn. We've got the police that's not effective in protecting private property rights. That is the issue. Nothing to do, and the police should be just as effective in protecting the private property rights of individuals wanting to sell their rhino horn as in protecting the rhino horn in the Kruger National Park. Nothing to do with the trade of rhino horn.
Nigel, you've been involved in intelligence on the ground. People are following this fight, and I do think Dawie has a point that we're not protecting the rhino, seemingly.
We are not. That's
so is it worth trying something else, even though it may be evil as well, because we are allowing the demand to stay there?
Yes, well, you've got to look at a number of levels here. You've got the level 1 poachers, the poaching teams that go in and kill these animals. And above them, you've got the level 2s, the people who organize and provide the logistical support for these operations. And going for these people is a police job, absolutely, and it's not been done effectively. And a lot of that is to do with corruption. It's corruption within the police and corruption within other government agencies. This is a business that's worth over $300 million a year, just in the South African rhinos. So it's very lucrative. Rhino horn is twice the value of gold, it's twice the value of platinum, and it's easily movable. Okay? And the same syndicates are involved in the smuggling out of rhino horn, are involved with ivory, abalone, with human trafficking, with the importation of drugs. This is about crime. And I agree with Dawie on this, is that before we get to any solution on this, we have to address the crime side of this problem.
We should address the crime side of crime as well. That you're pointing out something completely
Let's look at what government has. As far as I understand, somebody has mooted this. We act like a cartel. So we control trade in rhino horn. We control prices, basically like OPEC used to control oil prices. And just your thoughts on that. Presumably you would want the free market to reign supreme.
Well, let me just make another point. What we have at the moment, we have trade in rhino horn. It is illegal, but we have it. So if we legalize it, the guys that are protecting rhinos, the legal owners, will get some benefits out of the trade in rhino horn. A cartel is not the right answer. The cartel is not the right answer because this business model called a cartel is inherently an unstable model. It's not going to work. Ask OPEC. They don't work. There are always people trying to sell more oil than what they're allowed to sell. And using a cartel will actually, I think, encourage the illegal trade of rhino. Of course, I agree, we can regulate.
Then you sell at lower prices.
Yeah, I'm a part of the cartel. The prices are set high artificially, and I'm going to start selling some illegal. So it's not. But there's another point that I think is extremely important to make, and this is that, and perhaps this argument, this debate is really not really relevant. Because the reality is it's not going to get legalized. If it is going to get legalized, it will probably take years before it is legalized. So let's all accept that and stop fighting each other for the moment, the pro and the antis.
Is that true? Because government is seriously considering it.
I'm pretty sure that CITES is not going to allow that. If they do allow that, if they do discuss it next year, it will be another 4 years. You will probably know better. It will another 4 years before, at the soonest, before it will be legalized.
Francis, yes, the government has set up a committee to advise the minister on legalization or regularization of rhino horn trade. Look, there's nothing wrong with that. These issues have got to be opened up on a data basis and debated publicly.
Make your stance clear, because you say that maybe the free market will help in the future, but why is it not valid right now? Why do we have to deal with the syndicates first?
Right. We've discussed the ivory issue. The selling of ivory did not change market prices, 2007, 2008. You can take the drugs parallel as well. You know, people argue that if you legalize drugs, you would reduce the value of the crime, as it were. But here we have a problem, and it may or may not be true. In the drugs war, it's infinite. In other words, it's going to go on from generation to generation. In the rhino war, it's finite. We have 29,000 rhinos estimated globally. 80% of those in Africa, 80% in southern Africa, 80% of those in the Kruger National Park. And the Kruger National Park is having its population of rhinos decimated so badly that the government is now having to resort to moving those rhinos out. And the result of this is that we're going to lose one of the primary conservation areas in the world. The Kruger Park has got to be somewhere in the top 2 or 3 national parks globally. What is it going to look like when rhinos are no longer available to public view, and we find rhinos only in zoos and fortified locations?
You have about 30 seconds to wrap up.
But that's not the point. Of course, I agree with you. I want rhinos, but what's the mechanism we're going to use to actually do that? And the argument that the supply will increase, I think that is just simply untrue, because I promise you that the demand for diamonds is infinite.
The answer is to deal with the criminal syndicates. The government should use its intelligence services, it should have a police service that actually serves the public on this issue. And we need to hunt these people down rather than finding our rhinos hunted down.
Okay, let's stop there. I guess the commonality here is that whatever the solutions in the long term, we need to protect them now and look at that crime that's reflected on social media today. We did ask you for your opinions. Just a quick one. Des, rhino poaching has become terrible. We won't have any left. Can someone help? Economist Dawie Roodt, chair of the Focus Africa Foundation, Nigel Morgan. That's a wrap from Business Review. Ciao.